Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Melanin Margin, the weekly chat show where conversations about race are never off the table. We're your hosts, Quaviondre Williams.
And Daquon Wilson.
So let's get into this week's conversation. What's hot on the table this week?
In an article from the Associated Press written by Juan Lozano, we learned that Texas has taken over Houston's public school district, raising back to school anxiety for Houston students, parents, and teachers. The new state-installed Superintendent Mike Miles has restructured 28 underperforming schools, many of which are located in lower-income neighborhoods. Their teachers must now follow a centrally scripted curriculum with in-classroom cameras monitoring their performance and pay based largely on standardized test scores. Miles also has disbanded a team that supported students with autism, although his staff says special education services will continue as part of a restructuring and filled some vacancies with uncertified teachers. His most criticized change is transforming libraries at dozens of underperforming schools into discipline centers where students will get extra help and where those who misbehave will be disciplined, watching lessons on Zoom rather than disrupting their classrooms. Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner says the library's plan is creating a prison-like atmosphere in spaces usually associated with learning. One veteran secondary teacher who asked that her name not be used for fear of losing their job told the Associated Press that many of her colleagues are concerned Miles' system of tightly timed and controlled class instruction will turn teaching into assembly line work. Miles has brushed off the criticism, saying most parents, teachers, and students support his plans, allegedly. Andre, I wanted to ask you though, how do you think the reformed initiatives under Miles's education system might impact the education outcomes for Black, Latino, and low-income students in the Houston school district?
You know, before I answer this question, I just wanted to say, what the fuck is going on, y'all? Like,
Right?
seriously, what the fuck is happening? This shit going on in our society is getting really fucking scary, really fucking fast, Daquon. Like, so I'm gonna need whatever the hell is in the air to go ahead and clock out for me, because this shit right here is sounding like a plot from like some YA dystopian novel, and I am not here.
Is this Divergent?
That's right, But no, back to the question. This will 100% negatively impact the education outcomes for Black, Latino, and low-income students in the Houston School District, because these reform initiatives aren't treating these students as children. They're treating them like criminals. Not to mention how basing the pay of the teachers on the scores of standardized tests will totally shift how these teachers teach, but also how they go about disciplining the students in their classrooms. Instead of curating an ideal environment for learning by having these teachers be paid a livable wage and giving them the necessary resources to give their students the best learning tools available, they've created even more job insecurity among these teachers. We all know that many teachers are underpaid to start with. So most of the reason they follow this career path is because they have a passion for it. They were already struggling to make ends meet with the low pay and lack of resources provided to them by their districts. But to make their pay dependent upon their students' test scores while doing nothing to make their job easier is going to have massive consequences. And let me tell you how I think this is going to go. For the teachers who do decide to stay, because they are being forced to follow a centrally scripted curriculum that they are now being monitored on to ensure they are following it to a T, there will be no room for them to explore different avenues in communicating the information to their students who may not be able to learn in the traditional way, which will mean that these teachers will have to use, the grades of their quizzes and homework to determine who in the class is grasping the concepts and who is not. Now, if they know for a fact that certain students just aren't grasping the information, come time for those standardized tests, those students' scores could determine whether or not that teacher gets a pay cut or a pay raise. And depending on the character of the teacher, they could manufacture reasons to dismiss low-performing students from their classes in order to protect their class average, which would mean that these students would be labeled as problem children when their only problem was that they learned differently from others. This could create an environment for that child to lose their self-worth or get involved in the wrong crowd simply because they were never given the chance or opportunity to reach their fullest potential. It would be the whole, the self-fulfilling prophecy theory, where if the people around a person treat them as if they are a problem, then eventually they may start to believe it and become a problem. So I think that this whole thing is a very dangerous way to approach education. And I think it will do a lot more harm than good. But Daquon, I really, really want to hear what your take is on this, bitch.
Size and former educator. I am absolutely appalled by these reforms and changes that are going on in the Houston Public School District. It is, as somebody that, has a little bit of experience in the past being in a classroom teaching, it is absurd what they're doing. I fully believe that these people making the changes don't really understand how to run a school. They know how to run a business. And when I saw that Miles has a charter school background, I was like, okay, it makes sense. Because there are a lot of charter schools that are run just like businesses. And that's not how education happens. That's not how learning happens. And so one of my biggest problems with this is that it does nothing to really address the issues that are going on. You are turning libraries into detention centers, basically. You are getting rid of librarians and making it to where children just have to find the books on their own. And it's like, we live in a society where reading scores are dropping. The pandemic has affected so many students. There are so many students in this school district who are reading well below grade level. And a lot of students just don't like to read. And you are getting rid of the one mechanism that could install a love and appreciation for reading. Because let's be real, there are a lot of librarians who work magic when it comes to working with students. It could be one librarian that gives you a book recommendation that you fall in love with, gives you a book where you see yourself represented, which we know Texas doesn't like to see representation in their books, but that's a different conversation for a different day. We'll get to that sometime. But there is just so many problems with that. Not only the detention center of libraries, but also the centrally scripted curriculum. Like, what are we doing here? Anybody who has been in a classroom knows you can script and plan to the nines. You can script down to the second what you're going to say and what you're going to do in your classroom. The reality is, you are never going to follow that script. You are never going to go exactly as planned. That assignment that you think takes 20 minutes really takes 45 minutes. That assignment that you think takes an hour is going to take 2 days. So it really creates a system where students can't learn. They are just being pushed and pushed and pushed through a curriculum and tossed into a standardized test. That is not how students learn. That is not going to make these changes that and reforms that Miles alleges is going to happen. Because what's going to happen, like you said, it's like you said, Andre, is there are going to be a lot of students that fall behind. And because of how the curriculum is structured, there's not going to be time for the teachers to catch up these students. There's not going to be time for teachers to really check in with students in the classroom to figure out how they're doing, to be able to pivot and adjust and be like, all right, they're not understanding this while I'm explaining it like this. Let me take a pause, think of another way, another lesson, another form of engagement that will really help them to understand the concept. That's not going to be happening under this education system. So what you are doing is essentially telling these Black, Latino, and low-income students that we don't care about you. We only care about if you can perform well on a test, which again, standardized testing is not the way to go, has never been the way to go, has for decades shown so many problems, not only with how these tests are constructed, but the racist history behind a lot of standardized testing and testing systems. So let me calm down. Let me take a breath.
No, go off, bitch. Go off.
I just think that this is something that is such a problem, and we are not doing anything for the students who really need help. I mean, let's be honest, they got rid of teachers who worked with special education students and was like, we'll just throw a couple uncertified teachers there. They'll be able to do the gig. These misbehaving students, we're not actually going to really check on them. We're going to throw them in this detention room. They can look on Zoom and get whatever they need. And it's like, do you really think that this is going to be effective? Do you really think that this is going to be effective? This goes to a problem that a lot of charter schools have. I'm not going to name names, but a lot of charter schools only care about the appearance. They want everything to run like clockwork. They want students to be well behaved in their seats. If they're not well behaved, they will get pushed to a different room, out of view, or kicked out in general. They want lessons to run exactly as planned so that they can be like, look at how smooth the learning process is going. But in reality, it's only looking like learning is happening. The reality is those students aren't learning. So this is going to have so many negative repercussions on some of the most vulnerable populations when it comes to education in this country. And it's so sad. And I think that we also need to recognize that all of these changes is coming at a time where there have been improvements in the district, but the state, Texas, is like, I don't care. We're going to do what we want to, because unfortunately, education has become this huge political issue, and these state legislatures want to make sure they control what is happening in these schools. And it's so problematic, but that's another conversation.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think, and I also think that, the first step in education reform is to prioritize the needs and well-being of students, and in order to do that, you have to start at the root, which is the teachers. Teachers should not have to beg parents for classroom supplies, nor should they have to work another job to make ends meet. Teachers are a vital part of the education system. And while they may not be doing it solely for the money, people have fucking bills to pay. I've heard stories of teachers who said that they loved teaching and they would have been content doing it for the rest of their lives if the pay was better. But because they had to come out of their own pockets for basic classroom supplies, as well as not receiving any support from their district or their school, they had to leave the profession entirely. And for those who stay, not all of them have a passion for it, or, they aren't making enough to give 110% because they're barely making enough to give 50%. You know what I mean? So, now this doesn't excuse teachers who treat their students poorly. But what I am saying is that you can't be mad at some teachers who choose not to go above and beyond because they are essentially working their wage. When you pay people fairly, they tend to do more because they feel appreciated. And when that happens, it has ripples everywhere. If the teachers are paid fairly, they don't have that stress about finances. That would give them time to focus more on finding new innovative ways to teach their students. When learning is fun and engaging for students, they retain information better, which translates directly into better test scores. If these policymakers were really focused on making schools better for children, they would start with properly funding these schools, ensuring these teachers have access to classroom supplies and learning resources that they can share with their students. It seems like lawmakers keep missing the point every fucking time we bring up the conversation of why education is struggling in so many areas. The reason there is a teacher shortage is because you're not paying those who have aspirations of teaching a fair and livable wage. The reason students are struggling is because these teachers don't have access to learning tools that can make it easier for certain students to learn the curriculum. And the reason many of these schools are underperforming is because they are understaffed, the teachers are overworked, and their students are given less and less opportunities to excel in these low-income neighborhoods. As someone who has been in both poorly funded schools as well as well-funded schools in my life, I make no exaggeration when I tell you that you can feel the difference in the learning environment the moment you step in. And while I may have been an honor roll student growing up, it was significantly more difficult to learn in the poorly funded schools I attended than in the well-funded ones. And the only reason I was able to maintain that honor roll was because I had a good support system at home. But what about the students who have terrible home lives in addition to going to poorly funded schools? Or what about the students in these poorly funded schools who couldn't learn in the traditional way and needed after school tutoring or better learning software to comprehend the information they were being taught? What about them? Turning a school into what is essentially a prison practice run doesn't breed a better tomorrow. It just creates yet another challenge for students to overcome in order to excel in their studies. But what do you think, Daquon? How can education policymakers learn from this situation to ensure that reforms prioritize students' needs and well-being?
I think that education policymakers should listen to the people who are on the ground. They should be listening to the parents. They should be listening to the students. They should be listening to the teachers. All of the key playmakers in the system of education, because they are the ones that should be the focus, not on you and how you want to achieve these goals to pad your resume and look nice and yada, yada, yada. Your achievements doesn't matter. Your ego as a superintendent doesn't matter. What's important, what is most important is making sure that students have a safe and welcoming environment where they can learn and love learning. It is asinine thinking about these dis- decisions that are being made because, frankly, these aren't decisions that are being made with the students' well-being in mind.
Yeah.
Like even thinking about the one teacher who spoke up and wanted to be anonymous because
Yeah.
she was in
Afraid
fear
of
that
losing her
she could be
job. Yeah.
fired.
Mm-hmm.
It How can you have an education system where teachers are afraid to speak up in fear of retaliation and losing their job? It just does not work. So we need to make sure that we are prioritizing students and getting to the root of the cause. We won't have to turn libraries into detention centers if we actually focus on what it is that is making students misbehave, quote unquote. This can be a lot of different things. And we also know that sadly, a lot of misbehaving also comes with racial undertones. There are a lot of
Exactly.
teachers that don't understand the cultural nuances of their students and therefore misinterpret their actions and behaviors as being more aggressive or misbehaving, when in reality, if they understood where that student came from, they would know that that behavior, that action has nothing to do with trying to disrespect the teacher, has nothing to do with trying to cause a problem and misbehave in the classroom, and all to do about their culture and where they come from. So we need to stop doing all of this rigmarole of just the politics of
Not
performance.
rigmarole.
Rigmarole, girl. I, I
The
had to bring back the
rigomoris, girl. Rigomoris.
rigomoris. You know, they don't understand our language, so we got to bring rigmarole back or whatever. But we need to stop playing this performance and really get down to the issues. Like you said, there is no reason a teacher should be teaching by day and Uber driver by night simply to make ends meet. We should be paying our teachers a fair and livable wage, because let's think about all of the most important people in our society, all of the most successful people in our society. The thing that unites them all is all of them had a teacher in some way. The work that teachers do is not replaceable. The work that they do is not something that you can just throw anybody at, give them a script, and be like, all right, you good. Like, that doesn't happen. And even speaking to somebody where, when I first started to get into education, I didn't have teaching, or I didn't have a bachelor's degree in education. I didn't have a teaching licensure. I was one of those people that was swept into this system because they're like, we need teachers, so we're going to go to all of these top performing schools and be like, you're a good student, so you can obviously be a good teacher. And the reality is that isn't the case. It is so hard to enter education now, especially, but when you don't have a structure of supports and a structure that prioritizes the needs of the students and teachers of that school,
Mm-hmm.
you are essentially set up and destined to fail. And when you fail, they are going to look at you and be like, what happened? Because for one instance that they can see, somebody else succeeded, but they didn't have the same classroom you did. They didn't have the same students you did. They didn't have the same life experiences you did, or the same life struggles that you do. And so we have to stop acting like education can be this one size fits all thing. Every person
Yes, yes,
learns differently. Every
exactly.
person needs a different amount of structure and support. And so we need to focus on making sure that we are counting for these differences rather than creating this one size fits all system and
Yes.
forcing everybody to fit into it.